This is a 2022 addendum to this video, which was recorded in 2020, but I have moved over. It's one of the few videos surviving the deletion of my previous channel because I thought it was worthwhile content. The debate over Christian nationalism has exploded. I will probably do a video on the In His Image channel on Christian nationalism at some point. But for the moment, I think you should go check out John Harris's series of videos on engaging with Tim Keller. John Harris of the Conversations That Matter podcast. He's doing an excellent job from a reform perspective, interacting with Keller's views. I think he's demonstrated beyond all doubt that Tim Keller is a heretic and should be treated as such. So with that in mind, please enjoy the rest of the video. Good evening, everyone. Emory Moynagh here for In His Image. And today you guys are getting a plethora of videos this week because this came out from Tim Keller. You know, there was a time when people thought Keller was orthodox, or at least somewhat orthodox, but the more he talks, the less orthodox he sounds. This came out a couple of days ago. Thank you to Woke Preacher Clips on YouTube for the clip. I will try to remember to link to it in the video description. That's where I got the clip, but in case I forget, that's where I got it, so you can go look him up on YouTube and look for this clip. So Keller's being interviewed on a podcast, and here's some of the stuff he has to say. Just give Keller's commentary here a bit of a listen.
I would say for the last 20 years, the Christian right, though I usually would agree with their positions, I'm pro-life. You know, in other words, I still don't think that same-sex marriage is a good idea for the country or people. So I would technically be agreeing with them.
All right, pause. Same-sex marriage isn't a good idea. You know, Keller, I agree it's not a good idea, but there's a word the Bible uses for something like this. It's 3 letters. S-I-N. It's called sin. Or is that word not in a vocabulary of a New York Democrat? I mean, call it like it is. You can't call same-sex marriage sinful. And you say you're opposed to abortion. Well, okay, yeah. But you're a Democrat. The party that is all in favor of expanding abortion access. And yes, I'm not saying Republicans are guiltless on this. They're not. But you want to tell me that you're opposed to abortion, yet you are a registered Democrat. Those two things don't go together, particularly in New York City. Like, it's not like you're a registered Democrat out in Rustville, Alabama, or something like that, where the local party is probably pretty conservative. You're a registered Democrat in New York City, where the local party is literally communist. And you want to tell me you're opposed to abortion? I'm sorry, I'm not buying that, Tim. I'm just not buying that. I'm not buying what you're selling. I'm sorry.
But you know how they raise their money? For 20 years, they sent out letters talking about how you got to send us money because the gay people are going to try to come and take your children away, and because they're evil.
Hold it. Stop. Where was anything said in those fundraising letters that was false? Now, obviously, he's highly stereotyping here. He is just massively stereotyping. But that is what they're doing. That is what they're doing. Through the education system, they're turning children against their parents. There is a father in Canada right now who just went to jail for calling his daughter a she because his daughter thinks she's a he. He went to jail, Tim. Now, do you really think that that's not going to happen here? It happened in Ohio where people lost custody. I think it was of their, I don't know if it was of their daughter or their granddaughter. They lost custody of her. Why? Because she wanted to be a boy and they wouldn't let her be a boy. So the judge took custody away. Do you really think that they're not going to take your kids? It's happening here, Tim. How have you not noticed this? It's happening here. The doomsayers were right. The watchman on the wall warned of what was coming, and leftists like you sat there and said, that'll never happen. That's not what's going on at all. You're wrong, Tim. They were right. They were right. They were right to raise money off that, because guess what? It actually happened. And it's going to continue happening because men like you and the Gospel Coalition you fund and bio logos that you write for won't stand against it.
And because you know, the Democrats and the left are going to destroy your religious liberty, they just said awful things.
Hold on. Wait a minute. The Democrats and the left are going to destroy the... Tim, do you not know what the Equality Act is? How can you be so politically illiterate that you don't realize that is exactly what the Equality Act is designed to do? As a church, you will not be able to preach against homosexuality, against transgenderism, against abortion, against infanticide, even probably eventually against pedophilia. Now, Tim, I know you call yourself a Christian. I don't think you are. I think you've been one of the greatest imposters in the last 100 years. But let's just suppose, for the sake of argument, that you actually are a Christian. Don't you think that an act that is going to do that might be considered to be restrictive of religious liberty? Just a little bit. And by the way, who wrote that act? Written by a Democrat. Who sponsored the act? A bunch of Democrats. Who voted for the act? Almost exclusively Democrats. So, Tim, please don't give me the garbage that you actually care about religious liberty. You don't, because you will be amalgamated perfectly easily right into the state church. You'll have no problems adjusting your convictions to fit into the state church, none whatsoever. And you'll be more than happy to do what Jory Micah wants to do and report on those of us who object to the state church. You might be dead by that time. You're a little bit older, but you will be more than happy. You and people like you will do that because that's who you are. The state is your God, not Christ.
And vilify people is one of the reasons why so many gay activists now just don't want to forgive evangelicals. Because when they had a little more power in the 80s and 90s, that's how they raised their money. That's how they got people out. And weirdly enough, that's not the Christian way at all.
All right. Man, I'm up. This video is going to take a long time to get through a couple minutes of Tim Keller. Keller is literally arguing here that the gay people don't want to compromise with Christians because Christians said bad things about the gay people in the past. Maybe this passes in the fantasyville that is New York City, but it doesn't pass in real life. This has always been the agenda of the gays. The LGBTQ mafia is called a mafia for a reason. They're only interested in absolute compliance. They don't just want, we just want marriage. Well, the minute they got that, they went right on to the next thing. Now it's transgenders in women's sports specifically. Then it's going to be, you have to let your child transition if your child wants to transition. Then it's going to be pedophilia. You going to call that out, Tim, or is that going to be just more fear-mongering from the watchman on the wall? Is that what it's going to be? Like, the LGBTQ activists were never interested in compromise. They were never interested in compromise. Ever. They talked like they were because they knew that was the only way to get accepted, but they were never interested in compromise. They were interested in fundamentally changing the nature of America by means of wokeifying our sexual ethic. All the things that the evangelicals said in the 80s and 90s about the LGBTQ community are true. So they weren't nasty things, they were true things. But in Tim Keller's mind, they were nasty things because, the LGBTQ community is, is not sinful, apparently, because he, says that it's not just not a good idea. Yeah. Moving on.
Christian way at all is the way up is down. The way to rule is to serve. This is how Jesus did it. The way to get happy is to not think about your own happiness, but the happiness of others. The way to get any influence is to empty yourself and be a servant. That's Jesus' way. And they're not doing that. They're actually using the Nietzschean way. And I think what that did was...
Let's pause here. Wait a minute. So Jesus' way is to pander to people who are living wicked, sinful lives, tell them it's okay, and compromise with them. That's what Keller just told you. That is what Keller just told you. That's not Christ's way. Christ called out sin. Now, Christ did it in a appropriate fashion for his audience. When he, when the woman was taken in adultery in the book of John is brought to him, and they say, well, here's this woman, we caught her in adultery, and he just sits down, writes on the ground, and then he eventually looks at the crowd and says, hey, yeah, whoever's you without the first sin he who is without sin cast the first stone, I think is the exact quote. And what what happened then? Well, they all walked away because they got convicted of their sin. But what does Jesus say to the woman once they'd all walked away? He looks up and he says, Woman, where are thine accusers? Hast no man condemned thee? And her response is, No man, Lord. Jesus' response to that is, Neither do I condemn thee. Go and sin no more. In other words, yeah, you committed a sin, you're guilty, but I'm not going to condemn you. I'm going to have mercy on you, but go and sin no more. In other words, don't continue living your wicked lifestyle. Don't continue to be adulterous. See, there is a difference between calling out sin righteously and telling people to stop sinning and treating people badly because of their sin. I've played broomball with people who are LGBTQ. Who cares? It's broomball. But that does not mean that I accept their sin or that I affirm their gay wedding, right? That doesn't mean I affirm that. And if I were to know someone who was trans, I don't at the moment, but if I knew someone who was transgendered, if you will, I'm sorry, I'm going to refer to them by their appropriate name and their appropriate pronouns. Because they don't get to pick whether they're male or female. God did. They don't get that choice. I'm sorry, they don't. That's not biblical. And what Keller is suggesting is that Jesus would have ignored all the facts about the LGBTQ, would have ignored all the paganism, all the wickedness, all their sin, and just said, well, here, I'm going to serve you. I'm going to love you. Well, love means telling people the truth. And that's what the Watchmen on the Wall were doing in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, back when big gay wasn't a thing. But Keller doesn't care about that because it doesn't suit his progressive woke agenda.
By for a long time, just keeping evangelicals frothing at the mouth about how everything's going so bad and making everybody so angry. By the way, things are getting bad for evangelicals. It's very possible. I am not in denial about the fact that 10 years from now, if you have evangelical convictions about sex and gender, you may not be able to work for a major university or for the government or for a big corporation.
10 years from now? What fantasy world is Keller living in? This is happening right now. This is literally happening right now. It was happening 5 years ago. What fantasy world is he living in? If your whole biblical views on transgenderism, on homosexuality, do you think that if that was openly known, you could get a job teaching at a major university? Not a prayer. For crying out loud, my biostats teacher has her pronouns in her bio on the learning software we use. You're encouraged to use your own pronouns. Do you think if I came out as an evangelical Christian that I'd last 5 seconds in that program? I'd be gone. Where is Keller's head been? Under a rock? Because this has been happening for years. I mean, if you hold a biblical view of origins, you've not been able to work in a major university for decades. Of course, Keller doesn't care about that because he's a theistic evolutionist. And by the way, that's also something I find very, very, very amusing. Like, if a theistic evolutionist somehow doesn't actually love his brothers enough to say, yeah, you're allowed to work there, provided you teach the curriculum that you're supposed to teach, and you do a good job. They don't love their brothers like that. They have to censor their brothers, which is why I don't think most of them actually are brothers. But at any rate, Keller thinks that this is going to happen in 10 or 15 years. It's literally happening now. And if the Equality Act passes, it will be permanent. Again, I don't know what rock Keller's living under. But, I mean, maybe this is just the consequence of being a New York liberal. You think that, everything's fine when it's not fine because you aren't living real life like the rest of us. I don't know, but this is ridiculous. This is just ridiculous.
And it's not that Christians haven't faced that other places in the past. We shouldn't be crybabies. Nevertheless, having said all that, yeah, we nurtured this, and Christian nationalists use that, and therefore we brought it on ourselves. Even though I agree with...
Whoa, wait a minute. Keller says we brought this on ourselves? No, we didn't. Well, yeah, okay, yes and no. We didn't in the sense that we did the Watchmen on the Walls, the people in the 80s, 90s, like people like Ken Ham, he's been saying this for decades, were saying that, hey, their only interest is, the LGBTQ is bad, transgender is bad, abortion is bad, that's wicked, that's evil. Those people, we didn't bring it on ourselves from doing that. We did what God wanted us to do. And obviously I wasn't around doing that, but the people who did do that, they did what God wanted them to do in doing this. People like Keller, on the other hand, they did bring it on themselves because when they could have stood, they compromised. And Keller is so compromised, I'm not sure he knows the way back to Christianity. Now, Jeremy Sanders made this wonderful comment in the interview we did with him over a year ago on social justice. And it is very apt, and I'm going to repeat it here. Compromise condemns the sinner and corrupts the believer. And that is a fantastic explanation of what compromise does. But most evangelical Christians were very eager. Oh, let's just get along. Let's not, try and make the world mad at us. Let's not expend our cultural capital, Jonathan Lehman, writing for 9 Marks. Let's just, this isn't the hill to die on. We can afford to let this go. And now we're in a position where we have no ability to fight back because we've essentially surrendered on everything. This is why evangelicalism was always doomed to failure, because it was ecumenical, it never stood for anything, and it is now bearing the fruit that it has been nurturing for the last 7 decades, or whatever it is, 8 decades since evangelicalism got off the ground. It's always been doomed to failure, and because evangelicalism has always been about compromise. Always. And Keller seems to want to compromise even more.
With Perry and Whitehead, that in many ways the Christian nationalists are kind of using us. Not so much we evangelicals are not all Christian nationalists, but they are using us. They're recruiting very well.
Side note, what are Christian nationalists? What are they? Like, does anybody know what the term means? I mean, to me, the way the term's used on Twitter, it almost sounds like it means biblically faithful. I mean, not that I'm... Okay, let me take a step back. If you call someone a Christian nationalist because they love their family, they love their church, they hold to conservative biblical teachings, and they believe that those things are worth, are worth arguing for, then yeah, I'm a Christian nationalist if that's the definition. But if your definition is, somebody who wants to turn America into a theocracy, I don't know a single person who fits that definition. Not one. Not a single one. So I don't know what he means by Christian nationalist. I suspect he may have defined the term in the other sections of the interview. I don't know. But if he means someone who's biblically faithful, which is probably what he means, most likely, he's just, othering them because that's what he can do, then he's wrong. And the Christian nationalists, quote unquote, are right because they're actually standing for something. Keller won't stand for anything. Like, Keller would he'll squash to whatever the left tells him to squish to.
Because we made a lot of our people recruitable.
Yeah, Tim, from a pastor's perspective, how do you begin to steer your congregation away from falling into the idolatry of Christian nationalism?
Hold on. Again, depends what you mean by Christian nationalism. Do you mean worshiping the nation? Because I don't think any Christian actually worships America. There might be a few. Yeah, there probably are a few. But there's not very many. Like, most people don't really worship America. They think that America is a good place and they want to keep her free because they want to remain free to worship Christ. But they don't worship the nation. Ironically enough, it's people like Keller who are the nationalists because their God is the state. And they do whatever the state tells them to do. And so they're the actual nationalists. But this is typical of the left. They gaslight constantly. And anything they say you are doing, they are probably doing themselves. It's a radio show that my dad grew up listening to, a conservative talk radio. My dad listened to a lot when I was growing up. The host had several what he called laws of liberalism. And one of the laws of liberalism is if the left accuses you of doing something, there's a very good possibility they're doing it themselves. And that's what we're seeing here. Keller is accusing people of making an idolatry and worshiping America, when in fact it's people like Keller who are actually worshiping not America, but the state, and obeying every rule that the state puts forward.
Yeah. Right now, there are a few churches that are smack in the middle. Most evangelical churches in the cities, with a lot of young evangelicals, almost have a tendency to be over woke. And
oh, that's something I never thought I'd hear from Keller. Over woke. I wonder what he means by over woke. I would say any amount of woke is over woke, but Keller's not going to do that because he's a New York liberal. So
basically, kind of taking their cues more from the secular world, and actually talking about Christian nationalists in the most nasty ways.
Mm-hmm.
It is dangerous, but it's also it's one of the ways that you fuel extremism is by treating the extremists as sort of subhuman.
And just when I thought Keller was saying something intelligent, he goes right back into this. Christian nationalism is not extremism if he means someone who's biblically faithful. He's not biblically faithful, so that's probably what he means. If he means someone who wants a theocracy, there's literally nobody I know of who believes that. So he's strawmanning. So Christian nationalism, I know I'd like to see a podcast about Tim Keller talking about how dangerous it is to be woke. He's never going to do that, by the way. But for him to go after Christian nationalism, what he's doing is obfuscating. The real enemy is the woke within the church. But Keller is woke, so Keller will never attack that. That's the problem here. Keller's woke, so he won't attack the real enemy, because the enemy is him.
And on the other hand, I'd say most evangelical churches away from cities, and especially in the South, a lot of them in the Midwest, they're unhappy because their minister isn't denouncing the left enough and isn't telling people they need to vote for Trump. So when I talk to evangelical pastors, people are actually leaving their churches either because they don't talk about justice and about how bad Trump is and how bad Christian nationalism. They're not preaching enough about it. They're actually just staying with the biblical text and very often not even mentioning it, just talking about Jesus and now you have to be born again. I don't like that. On the other hand, I'd say probably a bigger number of evangelicals are mad at the ministers because they're not telling people how dangerous things are, and you have to vote for Trump, and we got to get behind this movement, and they're very upset, and people are just walking away.
Again, Keller is completely mischaracterizing the issue here. The woke evangelicals, they aren't evangelicals. They're pagans. Their God is the state, like Tim Keller. The non-woke evangelicals are realizing that there's a bunch of paganism going on, and they are going after their ministers, saying, hey, you need to talk about this. This is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with critical race theory in the workplace. We're dealing with the potential to lose our religious liberty. We need to talk about this. We need to talk about this. And the pastors who have been seminary trained and are on the gravy train for most of these denominations, because the denominations themselves are left to the left, even the Southern Baptists and the PCA are moving left. The pastors don't want to stir up controversy, so they just won't talk about these things. The things that the people in the pew want them to talk about and desperately really need guidance on from the shepherds won't touch. That's the problem. The shepherds are not being faithful. The shepherds are not willing to denounce the wickedness that is going on in the world, and Keller is giving them cover. Now, am I shocked? No. I am saddened, though. I am very saddened. Because 5 to 10 years ago, or probably 10 years ago, none of this stuff was happening. But, as I've told numerous people since the whole woke thing started, it's separating the sheep from the goats. It's separating the faithful shepherds from the hirelings like Tim Keller. Because the faithful shepherds are the ones right now going, this is what's going on in the world. This is how you as a Christian can live in a world that increasingly hates you. The hirelings like Tim Keller are trying to pretend it's actually not that bad, or that, we need to go woke in order to stay with the culture. So it's separating the sheep from the goats in a very, very good way. And if you want to see something that I'm sure Keller will never watch, but if you want to see just how bad and how anti-Christian the woke movement is, I'm going to recommend something to you. It's a documentary on YouTube. It's entitled Paint the Wall Black. It's about a popular deli in Chicago that got mega canceled because they refused to say Black Lives Matter. John Harris has promoted it from Conversations That Matter. It's on the Last Stand Studios, I think, YouTube channel. But if you type in Paint the Wall Black, it should come up. Of course, YouTube is censoring it, so you may or may not actually find it. But I've also shared it on Twitter, so if you go back through my Twitter feed, you should find it. It's very recent. I would definitely recommend watching that, taking the time, recognizing. Now, Grant, I want to point out the church in the video I do not agree with. It's a charismatic church, but they do seem to be preaching the whole gospel of Christ. They don't seem to be any of the really wacky charismatic stuff. So, take that 2 cents out of it, but just realize this is what's going to happen to everyone who takes a stand for Jesus Christ eventually, because the woke will not tolerate dissent. I don't care what Tim Keller says. The woke will never, ever tolerate dissent. They can't. It's not in their nature to permit any dissent. You must agree, or you will be compelled to agree. And Keller will be one of the ones who agrees, maybe under compulsion, but he will agree, provided he's still alive. And that's unfortunate. That's very unfortunate. And I take no pleasure in watching him go woke in front of our eyes and slandering his fellow Christian brothers, supposed fellow Christian brothers. But that is where we live. We are seeing in a time where the sheep are being separated from the goats and the hirelings are being separated from the faithful shepherds. If you've got a faithful shepherd, you pray for him, man. You pray for him, because they're rare. And if you've got a faithful shepherd, you support him. You back him up. I'm not saying unquestioningly, but I'm saying if he's standing for the truth of the gospel, you let him know he's got your back. So long as he continues to stand for the truth of the gospel, You let him know he's got your back. You've got his back, rather, because that's really rare. And if you don't, you need to support that. If you don't have a faithful shepherd, move. Find a new church. If you have someone who's spewing this wishy-washy drivel from Tim Keller, find another church. Because you don't have a pastor, you have a hireling. You have a pagan. And I'm sorry, but that's fact. The vast majority of people who won't stand against this critical race theory stuff, the vast majority of people who won't stand against the wickedness that's going on in the present world, they're either cowards or they're pagans, and in both cases you have an unfaithful shepherd, and you need to find a faithful shepherd. Thanks for tuning in. See you all next time.